very excited to be here. Great to see everyone. So I get the pleasure of talking to Liv. We've been friends for many, many years now. It's sort of mutual interest in AI, making the future go well, and playing stupidly competitive games. Uh, I've never seen Liv angrier than when she realized she was never going to beat me at table football, no matter how hard she tried. And so I thought we could divide the conversation into three tonight. So, what's going wrong? What are the opportunities for Britain? And how can we fix things? And so, maybe starting with that first bucket, it feels to me, and probably many people in this room, that things are not going very well in the West at the moment. And there's probably two lenses on that. One is the kind of cultural lens, and the other is the systemic lens. So you moved to the US 4 years ago, and so you have a very interesting perspective on UK, US, where we stand relative to them. How do you think about the cultural side of our current situation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, both the UK, the US, and Europe have a lot of problems. Many of those problems are shared. But, since I've been in America, and I live in Austin, Texas, the main sort of cultural difference I feel is like Austin, there's this energy, like this overflowing energy of ambition, of we're at the frontier, we can build anything. And this is not just in technology. Obviously, you've got all the SpaceX has a center there, you've got electric vehicles, you've got AI, but there's even like as a sort of spiritual hub. There's like new philosophies coming out of Austin, all this kind of stuff. It feels like it's very much on a sort of cultural frontier. And I have to say, when I come back to the UK, like, yes, there's energy here, but overall, it's like it feels like there's not that there's less of a sense of possibility, less of a sense of almost like freedom to just like really stick your neck out and try new things. I think that also extends a little bit to Europe, which to me feels like a little bit of like kind of retirement home energy.
Yeah.
Um, it's very nice. You can go to Italy. It's a wonderful place to live, great food, great weather. But there's no one like really building anything new there. It's like it feels like where people have sort of gone to retire. So that's sort of one of the main kind of
But that's funny, right? Because if you go back 10 years, DeepMind started the modern AI boom. Effective altruism is one of the most interesting and now global philosophy movements. So it's not like even in our lifetimes there was much more energy around this stuff. Is there anything, is it presumably it's changed over what, the last 5, 8 years, something like that?
yeah, it feels it's something like that. I think, I mean, again, without having numbers in front of us, it feels like one of the main things is kind of like brain drain. Like the certainly the Labour government, but other previous governments too, like the tactic they're like, oh shit, we have this big deficit. We need to find a way to raise more money. Let's just hike up tax rates more and more and more. We'll try and get it from the rich. But the thing is that a lot of the people who are builders who have the energy to try and build new stuff in the UK, it's very easy for them to move somewhere else. Like there's in the US, like if you don't like an increased tax rate, you can move to a different state, but you stay within the US.
Yeah.
Whereas in in the UK, you can go to Italy or Portugal or somewhere like that, and you're not far away from your family. So it's a very kind of low cost to live overseas, and you're scaring away the people you need to start growing the pie in the UK.
Yeah. And are there any like how does the American identity compared to the you okay there?
I'll take my earring out because I can hear it banging.
That's probably
Yeah,
better.
there we go.
Yeah. How does the American identity and the British identity compare? It feels like we've lost some sense of being British.
Yeah, like so where I live in Texas, there are so many both
Yeah.
US and Texan flags. And that isn't like people proudly have those flags. So there's this sense of like pride and freedom in the like very best sense. And as we've all seen, like the idea of like waving a British flag has almost sort of become synonymous in some people's minds with oh, that means you're a racist or something like that. And it's something that like Texans, they can't conceptualize. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, of course you should be proud of the country you live in. And yeah, it worries me because if you don't have a shared cultural identity, there's someone's phone here that's buzzing. I don't know who that is. Anyway, if you don't have a sense of pride in the nation that you live in and a sense of shared cultural identity, then you leave yourself vulnerable to other ideologies that are very expansionist. Um, you know, I feel like the UK systems, I mean, obviously America has gone through a sort of a right-wing swing within its institutions now, but the UK hasn't done that. And so it's still very much under the clutches of wokeism. And it's also, becoming therefore vulnerable to very other expansionist religions, ideologies that are really taking root, and that concerns me deeply.
Yeah. And then maybe, well, should we chat about the systemic bucket? Like, what do you think's going on there?
Hmm. Um, I mean, systemically, I mean, actually, you could probably speak to this better, frankly, because you have built a company here, right? You've got one of the largest AI companies in the UK. You also actually, could you share this story you have about what happened during COVID? Because you were working closely with the government during COVID, and I think it's a really good example of the systemic rot that's going on.
I have told this story at an LFG thing before, so people that heard it before, forgive me. But I was explaining to Liv. So in COVID, we helped build this system called the early warning system that predicted the number of patients across the NHS. And we managed to connect that up with the wastewater surveillance system. So basically, you pull sewage out of sewers across the country, test it for COVID genetics, and then we proved that you could predict how many patients were going to turn up at every hospital across the country. So you might think that's the total future of public health in the UK globally. It was at the time by far and away the best system in the world. We were advising the US people, advising the Israelis, and basically everyone else on how to make this work. So presumably the government should double down on it. Actually, no. It gets closed down because the political will was to make sure that COVID spending was zero. So this totally critical piece of future national infrastructure disappears. But that's not the end of the story. A few months later, the government decides to procure for a strategy for the thing that we'd already built. Now, we bid for that project and won it, and we said, in fact, yes, you can build the thing that we've already built. Next, they procured to get somebody to build the alpha version of the thing that we'd written the strategy for that we'd already built. But they said, to make things fair, no one who'd worked on any of that previous work was allowed to work on the bid. So we lost that bid, and basically on price. A few months later, we get a call back. The supplier has not been able to build the thing. And so we needed to come back in to build the second version, alpha version, of the thing that we'd already built on the basis of the strategy that we'd written. And then basically from there, it became a cabinet office thing rather than a health thing, and it's kind of disappeared into the ether. 4 years later, the UK is now behind Malawi in its ability to do wastewater biosurveillance, which obviously is a completely critical part of where we need to be going.
Right, because COVID was like not the last pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
If anything, it's a warning and sign of things that are to come.
Totally.
The technology to, whether or not you think COVID was a lab leak or not, the point is in the future, it's going to be easier and easier for either accidental lab leaks or actual hostile actors to create synthetic pathogens. So we need, everywhere on Earth should be ramping up its biosecurity, and one of the best ways to do that is to have good wastewater detection.
The saddest thing about this situation is that is actually one of the good examples, because some people are actually trying to make the right thing happen. The vast majority of times, things just disappear and never happen because they got lost in the system. And so I think that ultimately, as I'm sure is going to be a theme many times tonight, we have built our own straitjacket of regulations that means we just can't do the sensible things anymore. And we see that from the like the big picture, like critical piece of national infrastructure, to very small projects on a daily basis. Actually, you have a nice way of like characterizing some of these forces that like govern society that I at least find helpful for like explaining to people. So can you tell us about Moloch and Norma?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So like, there are these very, systems. The systems we have are ultimately they're kind of a collection of forces, game theoretic forces, economic forces, and so on, which aren't very easy to explain to the general public. And a way that a lot of our systems go wrong on Earth, this is not just in the UK, this is kind of everywhere. One of the ways they can go wrong is when short-term individual competitive incentives create sort of aggregate behaviors that are misaligned with what the overall world needs. So a classic example of this would be, once upon a time, the media tried to have headlines that matched the content of their stories, and their stories were as much, adherent to the truth as they could. But as the media ecosystem got more and more competitive, then basically people were, organizations were incentivized to sort of hijack dopamine or rage or fear wherever they could. So they started leaning into clickbait and like outrage peddling. And for a while, that was just kind of the domain of the little new media companies, largely. But nowadays, you see even the really big,
Everywhere.
the supposedly establishment, real journalistic newspapers leaning into clickbait. And because, like, if they don't do it, they'll get left behind everyone else that does. They're in such a highly competitive ecosystem. So in some ways, it's like a sort of force of competition gone wrong. And because it's a real mouthful to explain, I didn't coin the term, but someone like related it to this mythological, well, actually biblical demon called Moloch, which is basically like the god of driving people to sacrifice more and more of their virtues and values in order to win a narrow goal. And if you dig into a lot of the sort of systemic issues going on Earth, even like arms races, again, like most AI companies don't want to like sacrifice safety and cut corners, and possibly risk building a dangerous product. But they know that if they don't do it, all their competitors are going to do it anyway. So they feel like they have to do it too. It's this kind of rat race dynamic that is underlying a lot of our problems, including environmental stuff, information breakdown, etc. So that's like Moloch, the god of competition gone wrong. And then you kind of have the flip side, which is, I think, the one that the UK is more under. And I call her Norma, which is essentially like the demon of bureaucracy and red tape. She kind of has like a Dolores Umbridge energy. She's like, oh, you can't do that without my say-so because it's not safe. Yes, you need, like, come and talk to let's talk about this in a committee. It's very anti-competition. It's very, it's what gives rise to stagnation. And so really we need to find a way to resist both of these malevolent forces. But yes, particularly for the UK, to me, it feels like it's almost more under the clutches of Norma. This like almost like Dolores Umbridge from like, Harry Potter energy, because often it appears it's actually scarier than like classic evil character like what's his name, Voldemort. He was obviously bad. He's got snakes and he's like killing people left and right in his scary face. Whereas Umbridge, she's very sweet and pink, and I'm just doing this for your well-being, which is almost a more insidious form of evil. And I feel like that energy, this like dark ministry of magic, red tape energy, is what the UK's under.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the opportunities now. I think there's one which is the sort of breaking the stagnation, fighting the norma, and then there's another which is technology. You were at an AI war game recently. How did that play out?
Yeah. Does everyone know what a war game is? Yeah. Hopefully, okay. Well, for those who don't, basically, a war game is just like you get a group of players, you're given some kind of scenario, and you're meant to like try and as best enact each person that the role that you've been given. So in this particular AI war game, it was the situation is it's like the end of 2027. One of the companies is just about discovering artificial general intelligence, so is about to get like this potentially huge advantage over everybody else. And so in this war game, you had like someone representing OpenAI, you had someone representing Google, you had someone representing the US military, China, the US president, all the various sort of invested bodies. And we had to, as best we could, try and make a sort of rational, well, represent how they would act. And, the main takeaway for me was like, well, first of all, the world is not remotely prepared for what's coming.
Yep.
And there's a lot of Molochian dynamics going on. But it also made me like actually empathize with the position that, for example, one of the times I played it, I was the US president, and I was sort of pushed away into the corner by Russia and China, who were screaming at me, threatening nuclear war if I didn't, like collaborate. That's one possible scenario, but there are many other scenarios. And I guess the main thing it really like made me like really internalize was just like how world changing this technology is going to be. And if the UK is not seriously doing everything it can to like be a part of that and not just like ride on the US's coattails, which there's no guarantee it'll be able to continue to do, especially if it culturally keeps distancing itself from the US, which it is doing.
Yeah.
As much as like you see, Starmer trying to butter up to Trump, and I'm not saying, you should have to like give up all your values to butter up the big guy in the playground in the playground. You want to be building so that you can be be an equal player, or at least some kind of player in the game. So that was one of the main takeaways. But I'm actually curious, like what you have built an AI company here in the UK. What was your experience like doing that?
Well, it's kind of funny. The UK is in quite a good position in some sense. We have great people. DeepMind is still based here. We have great companies like Wave and 11 Labs, Synthesia, hopefully faculty as well. I guess the real problem is that the returns to technology just seem to be so huge with scale. Like all of US growth has come roughly from 7 companies, that even though we're good, it's very unclear that that's good enough. Like in this world, you might really have to be absolute top tier to be a player. And at the moment, we aren't that. And so I don't, we've also done World Games. And at the moment, the UK just tends to drift into irrelevancy. And I just don't think that's a good thing or something we should aspire to.
Actually, yeah, in this war game, the UK was lumped in with Europe, and UK Europe became irrelevant after literally like the first sort of iteration of decisions.
Yeah,
I want to talk about them.
Roughly how it seems to work. Okay, so that's all pretty depressing. How do we fix things? There'll be lots of young people in the audience today, and they will be looking to accomplish great things to turn the UK around. Poker is an incredibly interesting sort of playground for developing and learning about a bunch of skills. There's like strong quantitative elements, strong like people and emotional elements. What separates good poker players from great poker players?
Well, one thing that all good poker players, good and great ones, have in common is like a deep competitive spirit. Like it's very hard to be good at poker if you don't like trying to win. But what really like sets the very best apart is, I think poker is such a good analogy for life compared to other games like chess because, not only are you trying to do all the sort of mathematical stuff, the game theory of like what cards you have and like the odds and so on, but there's also all this like ancillary information you're always trying to take in, like what is my opponent thinking? Like, what is their body language telling me? Oh, they actually just went on a big winning streak the last half an hour, or they went on a losing streak. How does that change the dynamic? And the best players are the ones who know how to synthesize both the like quantitative skills and the quantitative information and the qualitative. Um, I think that is like probably one of the most important things. And then the other one actually is having just an incredibly deep emotional resilience. Because poker, I mean, it can just be a complete bitch. You can be playing the best game of your life. You've been studying, you're doing everything right, and the cards just won't cooperate. You know,
Yeah.
you're getting in as an 80, 90, 95% favorite, and you just keep getting like sucked out on or like getting unlucky each time. And you have to learn how to just take those punches. You also have people verbally abusing you sometimes. Like it's rough. It's just a very rough environment. And so you have to develop like a really strong sense of your own your like what is your own emotional state, because I mean everyone gets upset, that's okay, but the question is like how quickly can you shrug it off and get back into that rational mind state, and also just keep chugging away and knowing whether like okay I just lost a bunch of money over the last 6 months, is that because I played horribly or is it because I got unlucky, or a combination of both. And so it really teaches you to sort of learn that discernment.
And how can, I mean, you put in what, 10, 15 years to professional poker.
10 years, yeah.
How can people in the crowd learn some of those skills without having to commit quite to that level?
Um, yeah, I mean, obviously, poker. I think if you can find a fun game, a social game, just to learn a bit of it, that will always help. But I think when it comes to like the emotional grit or learning to identify luck or skill, if you are an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, that is a great way to get kicked in the teeth a lot.
Correct.
But sometimes, you will get a big, big payoff. Um, and especially to young people, like if you don't have a family to support yet, now is the time to like get out there and experiment and like take calculated risks, figure out what suits your personality. You don't have to be like an Elon type personality to be a great entrepreneur. I know a bunch of entrepreneurs who are very different personalities, but they're still, they find a way to do business in a way that suits them. So yeah, I mean, it's really just, I mean, poker is a game of experimentation and learning and what makes you tick. And I think that's the same with all business or life endeavors.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so maybe a couple of thoughts just on things that are like slightly broader than poker. So maybe a couple of reflections from doing a startup that probably sit adjacent to the kind of like individual skills. I think two things that I'd say have been super important to kind of faculty in our journey. One is building things in teams,
Mm.
which actually is a weird thing you probably just don't really experience that much in poker. Like,
No, you actually do. That's a very good point. One of the things that sets the greats apart from the good as well. Poker is as and an individualistic a game as you'd think you could
yeah,
get. And yet there are these little like study groups.
oh, interesting.
So, I've played with my best friend where we're going after each other like at the neck, trying to get each other's money. But then that evening we'll sit
I've seen
down.
you, yeah.
Yeah, we'll sit down and we'll talk through the hands
Yeah.
and try and make each other better, because there's enough money out there to be not everything has to be a competition. So actually even in that, like teamwork and collaboration is so key. Sorry, I hijacked you.
No, that's really interesting. Okay, so we're coming up to time. Let's end with some system level things that we could do for the UK. I think they mentioned it actually in the early in the little video about you, that you think a lot in terms of these win-win opportunities. What is a win-win opportunity in the abstract?
Yes, I mean a win-win obviously in the classic game theory sense is just like, a mutually beneficial thing. Usually it's modeled as like two people, but that extends to like a larger group as well. You can call it omni-win, win-win-win, whatever you want to call it. A true win-win is where you build or do something that has makes everybody or as many people, the majority of people's lives better, but it also benefits you. And I feel like that touches on a little bit sort of of some of the cultural stuff that the UK has been suffering from, because what is like wokeism, like, and that like sort of pathological, oh, I must be in service of everybody else. No, I must bring up the lowest people.
Yeah.
Is that it becomes pathological when you do it as this like, you almost like fetishize self-sacrifice, and that is not sustainable. And I think that's what the UK has been doing. I don't know if it's like subsidizing some kind of like colonial white guilt or something, or like trying to atone for that, where it's like, oh, we'll just keep
Sacrificing.
flagellating ourselves in order. If you keep doing that, you will not be able to help others in the long run. You have to make sure your own cup is full first. And so a real win-win is something that you make sure that you benefit deeply as well. And it takes creativity and effort, but that is absolutely possible.
And so what does that look like for the UK specifically?
Well, so I mean, you want to grow the pie. That's the most important thing. Because again, like it feels like the UK has been trying, it's almost been focusing more on, well, we have this fixed pie, so let's just make sure we divide it up as fairly as possible. Fairness is important, but I would much rather live in a world where there's a fucking huge pie that is divvied up a little bit unequally, but everyone gets more than they would, than a small fixed pie that is perfectly divided and everyone on net gets less. Like that makes no sense. So one of the ways you can do that is, I mean, first of all, it's abundantly clear that there is horrible inefficiencies in all of like public spending. We need to fix up public services so that people, aren't waiting weeks on end just to see a GP about like a persistent cough. You need to get tougher on petty crime, because if people keep seeing petty crime everywhere, you end up living in a low trust society, and low trust societies cannot continue to exist. Like they do not flourish. So you need to like plug those leaks, and simultaneously you need to start like really thinking on like a systems design incentives level of how to attract the best talent who will help you grow the pie again, and that is completely possible. And if I can like end on one point, I think one of the biggest lessons poker taught me is, I've been in poker, like I'll be playing in a poker tournament and I have a big stack. I look like I'm going to win this thing. And then I lose all my chips, or almost all my chips. Like I've gone down to like 10% of my stack or half of my stack, and it feels horrible. And I see everyone else going up ahead of me. And yet there have been so many times where, sometimes I just give up and then I'm out. I dwindle it away and I'm out a few hands later. Other times I've dug my heels in and I'm like, I'm going to keep fighting. And I've gone on to win the entire tournament. And I kind of want to like, that can happen to the UK too. Like, it might feel a bit shit right now, but there's so much possibility. There's so much hope. It just takes a few strategic changes and a mindset shift. And like, we can like go on to like become great again. Yeah, that's like, I feel like that's the main philosophy there.
Amazing. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end it. Please join me in thanking Liv.
And thank you, Mark.